Okay, we're gonna get going. Ready, Gayatri? All right, so we're just gonna do the quick intro here, and then we'll end the survey, and then we'll hand it off to you. So, all right, hello, folks. So welcome to Turbocharging Social Activism with Data Standards. Austin Convention Center, room 1080. So we're going to get started. Just for those who just came in, a quick logistics note. So our moderator, Gayatri, had some trouble, couldn't make it here to Austin. So she's on Skype. We've got the audio and the video, we think, working well. So we're going to do some quick intros, and then she's our moderator. So we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work so well, then we'll switch things around. But we're optimistic. So first, my name is Josh Cohen. I chair the Open Supporter Data Interface group. We are a coalition of customers and vendors on the progressive side working to create a common data standard for things like people, donations, etc. And with me is Jason Rosenbaum.
Hi, I'm Jason Rosenbaum. I'm the Director of Technology at Action Network. We are a nonprofit online organizing toolset for progressives.
Hi, my name is Tim Anderegg. I'm the VP of Education for OSDI, which means I do kind of outreach and webinars about it to get people to know what we're doing. Recently, I was a Data and Technology Director of the New Organizing Institute. I just made the move to government, but really excited that this is happening.
Okay, all right, and Gayatri, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks for bearing with us. My name is Gayatri. I am most recently the Chief Operating Officer of Catalyst, which is a big data working in the civic space. And I actually just left, and I'm now consulting to all startups. And I've been part of OSDI in early days.
Great. So we wanted to just get started and do a quick survey of who's in the room. So you can see a little bit about our coalition here on this next slide that Josh is moving to. We got a ton of groups here represented. I don't know, Josh, if you wanted to say any more about that.
Yeah. A little bit here.
Oh, that's fine. But we wanted to mostly see who was in the room. Just quick introductions for yourself. So we got a couple of questions for you to start off.
Yeah. So basically, if you could just when we read off the question, just raise your hand if you fit into this category. So who in the room is what we call a practitioner, data person who's worked on either like a campaign or a nonprofit? All right, yeah, good. How about like a digital person or data person not in nonprofit? Okay. Who works on as a vendor or a provider of tools or services for nonprofits or campaigns? Okay. What was this question? Yeah, who's a software developer? Okay, Ruby? Python? Okay.
Cool.
All right. Okay, so yeah, so Gayatri, how you doing?
Well, that sounds good, and that helps us to understand a little bit about who's here. So we'll try and tailor the comments and some of the topic discussions accordingly.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna hand off to you and start with the first question.
Great. All right. So as we think about the open, the common API and how this group came together, really, what is all the buzz about? And what's driving the need for this common spec? What's it going to do? What problems does it solve?
Okay. Are you able to hear that? Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna answer the first one. I'm going to give the first answer to that question. And so what I'm going to try and do is explain what the problem was and the reason why we got started.
Don't worry about it. It's just going to cover things. Just go.
Okay. All right. So in 2012, I was the director of technology for the marriage campaign in Washington State. And one of the things that we did when we first got there was we tried to figure out what's our technology choices or solution going to be. And the sort of state of the state then was that most of the vendors want to give you one suite, one solution. And what we found is that we wanted to have like a variety of things. And so what is up here on the slide is what we ultimately designed, which was kind of we call it Marriage Hero. It was a dashboard where supporters could go and do a lot of different things. They could sign up for events. They could figure out what like the thing of the week we needed them to do was. And we had leaderboards that kept track of who our most active volunteers were. Now, in order to do that, we needed to deal with a few different problems, right? From an events point of view, our finance people, they used one system. They used a system called Salsa. It had features like ticket levels and pricing around events. It did that really well. But our field people who were doing phone banks and volunteer operations used something called the Van, which is really good at tracking volunteers, matching their connections to voters, and doing attendance, things that are important for them. So we didn't have the ability to have both sides using the same tool, and we needed to have everyone all supporters using a consistent interface. And so we built code to provide like a singular web interface so that could happen. The same
and
thing.
Also, data could go back and forth because both sides need to see that.
Right. Same thing on the fundraising side. We had presences on different systems. If you're progressive, you definitely want to have a presence on ActBlue. We also had another tool that let us build customized personal donation pages that was easy to do for like mom and pop. And we had our main donation page on the site, which came out of Salsa. So at the end of the day, this is what our world looked like, right? We had all these different systems and we had to make data go back and forth, but it was super difficult because a lot of them didn't have APIs, so we were writing web scrapers. Even when there were APIs, they were like arbitrarily different, right? Like, I mean, there's little competitive advantage to having different field names on resources like people or donations. So we had software engineers. We were in Seattle, Washington, so there's a lot of them, a lot of gay ones. So we built all this code and we did this thing, but the problem is it was super fragile, right? So we couldn't reuse that across campaigns easily. Another thing that happened recently, in 2014, we took a tool that we had originally built back then in 12 and greatly expanded it, and this is for early voting. So who lives in a state that does mail-in voting or early voting? Colorado, yeah, a lot. So now, like, voting is really like a 3-week thing, right? And so we built a tool that let people log in to the app and find out who of their friends had not yet mailed in their ballot. So a user would go to the app, see a list of their friends who hadn't voted, pop up a little message box which would send had a template in there, and it would send a message like, hey, do you know where your ballot is? Have you mailed it in? Why not? Yada, yada. And we also had a leaderboard that showed who had been the most active. And so we were able to touch like 10,000 people in the 2014 elections about nudging them to vote. But like keeping this thing running, so we had 3 states. We had Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. And like every day we're getting what they call matchbacks from the state of all the voters who had voted, the IDs. And so we had to match that up with like the voter file and also do the matching with Facebook. And so pretty much for like the last week and a half of the election, like my entire existence was getting these huge CSV files, switching them around to make them in the right format, and then importing them into the tool until it all ended. But like, there's no good reason why we shouldn't have a format for this kind of thing that can be standardized. So where does that lead us, right? This is sort of the problems, and if you're practitioners, you've probably run into similar situations, right? Yeah. So the answer that we chose to pursue is to see if we can get everyone at the same table, figure out like what are the field names on a person, what are the field names on a donation, how do we wrap that in a RESTful API and make it so that people can piece together solutions by mixing and matching, and also like pulling in little innovative applications on top in like an ecosystem rather than just these monolithic solutions.
And so I'll expand on that a little. From my perspective, Action Network is an online organizing tool. So it does one thing, and we try to do it really well, which is managing your email, managing your online actions like online donations or signing petitions, that kind of thing. We don't do a lot of the other things that Josh mentioned, right? We don't do like voter file stuff, volunteer stuff, phone banks, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. So we really want to kind of position ourselves in this kind of ecosystem of apps. We've, in the past, I think you've had these very monolithic tools that have tried to do everything. And I think they haven't really done anything particularly well because they've tried to be all things to all people. And I think we're really moving in this space towards this ecosystem environment where you can pick the one best app for the job, the specific job you want to do, like you do on your phone, right? You pick the one best app to do email and the one best app to do messaging and whatever it is. I think we're moving in that direction in a lot of places and definitely in this space. And so that requires a common standard to connect all these things so all the data can talk to each other. So that's where we see ourselves in the future, and that's why this project was interesting to us.
Yeah, and as a software developer and a fan of open source in general, I think it's really, APIs are incredibly important for that, because if you want to add a new feature to a tool, or the tools that are out there don't do exactly what you need a specific visualization or a specific kind of reporting setup, whatever. In the past, you've had to go to the vendors and kind of make the case for why they need to add this feature to their tool. If you're the only one asking for it, it's unlikely it's going to happen. It could take a long time to happen. You might not even be sure exactly what you want to do. But with the open API like this, developers can innovate on their own and just come up with a solution, try it out, and if it works, they can share it with others, and everyone in the space kind of benefits from that innovation.
Right, so if it's so great, why hasn't it been done before? What's prevented us from starting it?
From my perspective, I think there were a couple obstacles before this. One is certainly the competitive nature of the companies in these spaces, right? It's not necessarily, when they look at it at face value, it's not necessarily in their best interest to write an open API that can integrate with everything, because that might cost them some business, at least so they think. Now, I think the views are changing a lot on that. I think people are recognizing that this ecosystem is what people want. But I think that was definitely one obstacle.
Yeah, I think 5 years ago as well, there just wasn't as much data out there and as many types of data. Back in the day, you just had to worry about field data on a campaign. Now you have digital tools, you have more and more different types of data to keep track of, and growingly, a given tool might not be able to handle all of that, right? So I think vendors are realizing it's better for them to open up to an ecosystem of tools, so that way, if someone has a particular type of data that they need to work with, they don't have to choose your tool or another tool. They can choose both instead. And so that way it expands their user base and just makes more opportunities for them to get new customers.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about brass tacks. As a technology vendor, which there are a number of members of OSDI, what do you get? What's the benefit for participating in it? What's the benefit of using spec?
So for us, it takes some of the, we want to be in this ecosystem, and we recognize that our partners are going to use a lot of other things to do a lot of work. They might use a different fundraising system to do something special over there. They might use, the van to do voter file work and stuff like that. It takes my job of integrating with those, applications and my developers. It takes that job maybe from a 3 or 4 week development project down to maybe a couple days. Right? If we're all using a common API, I think there's a dream that at some point in the future this is plug and play and it's like an hour. We'll see if we get there. But taking it down from 3 weeks to a couple days really changes the barrier to entry for me building an integration that our partners want and makes it a lot.
It gives you a competitive advantage over someone else choosing up a system because you're able to integrate.
We're able to integrate. We're able to do it quicker. It's less costly, and so it means that more integrations can happen.
That makes sense. Tim, from your perspective?
Well, I'm not really speaking from as a technology vendor per se, but like I said before, I think it broadens the scope of what your tool can do and who can use it, and that's incredibly valuable for folks.
Yeah, and we're really excited too about people building on top of it, right? As Tim mentioned, I would like the API to be rich enough that people could build an application on top of what we're doing, and maybe it's a custom thing like what Josh showed for the Marriage Hero stuff, and it just works for one campaign. But maybe it's something that gets open source and gets shared, and people fork it, and people try it out, and it kind of spreads in that way. I think that's really exciting as well.
I do think part of the reason that it's happening now as well is that there's been this narrative of the progressive technology space sort of keeping an edge on their opponents, and I think sort of the next phase of that is figuring out how to get our data talking to each other and working together. We have more technologists now, we have more data people now. This sort of ecosystem will help enable us to keep that competitive edge.
So proof is the pudding of making it happen, right? So what how is OSDI working to increase the number of implementations? Is there hope that we're going to see this, or is it still too pie in the sky?
Did you want to answer the previous question first, Josh?
Yeah, I wanted to just make a comment on the previous one as well.
Sorry, Josh, I couldn't see you.
It's okay. Yeah, one of the things as well is that in terms of like being at a customer or being at a campaign, it makes it easier to stitch these things together, and it also brings the skill level required to do that down. You know, like more and more, especially like organizations like NOI, where Tim came from originally, we train people on how to use Python, right? How to use SQL, how to write scripts. And so the ability to, let's say, have a web developer who knows some PHP, he can actually use an OSDI library to pull in data from different systems. And so it allows smaller and smaller campaigns, like if you're not Obama with tons of bodies and money, like you can actually have one of these heterogeneous solutions like we had in Washington, right? Without having to have a team of software professionals, right? So
it's more accessible.
Yeah, it's more accessible.
Mm-hmm. And that's so that's Frederick, and that's really how you really started this group, right? Because you're the founder.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about some of you know, how we're working, how the group, the coalition is working to implement this spec?
Yeah. So that's right. Prior to doing the campaign work, I used to work at Microsoft, and I was the standards guy there, which I know is kind of an oxymoron, but it's true. I was one of the good guys, and so. After going through the campaign experience, and I thought to myself and talked to the vendors that we'd worked with, and started up OSDI, we kind of started it up like in the mirror image of like W3C or IETF or DMTF, and basically applied the process and structure that those use to this space. And I think to the earlier question about why hasn't this happened before, I think that is partly why maybe previous attempts didn't succeed or get as far as we have, is because they didn't really look at it from like a standards process point of view. And so, you know, where we are now is that we've been alive about 2 years. We're coming to the close of our sort of V1 of the specification. Jason is actually, they're really the first implementation, and like part of designing the standard means that you have to have people who are willing to experiment and do that. And like the benefit is that we get early feedback on what decisions we made as a committee that were good and which ones were not so good. And also it means that like the spec is a bit of a moving target, right? So it's great that Jason was able to do that. And now that the spec is solidifying, now it's going to be easier for other members to implement because we've had some testing around it. And we are doing, you know, keep paying attention over the next few months, and you'll probably see some interesting things come out. But yeah, we're definitely working with different members to drive implementation.
And I would say,
Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about how the spec got created?
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, I think the way people implement this is really within the standards process, right? We're very intentional about the process, and we all realize that the process is important. So there's a lot of buy-in that happens, right? It's a democratic structure, and where most of the work gets done in the tech committee, you know, we have people who make proposals and make motions, and we vote on it, and we meet every week and talk about the spec. We work through GitHub issues and all that kind of stuff. But it's really that buy-in process that I think moves people towards the implementation. So they are, you know, everybody participates in making the spec, right? When we joined OSDI, I would say the spec was maybe like half done, and we were able to contribute a few things based on, you know, what we wanted to do with our API. And then, you know, others are contributing other things, and we're all building this together, and that leads to the kind of buy-in that you see. And so we're seeing, you know, the other companies out here in this space that are on this committee, right? You know, your NGP Vans and your Salsas and your Blue State Digitals, people are on those calls, people are participating, and that's leading them, you know, inexorably towards implementation.
Yeah.
So it sounds very kumbaya. So how are disputes resolved? You know, it's a cacophony of voices, a lot of different players at the table. Josh, do you want to speak a little bit about the governance involved and sort of how you manage that?
Yeah, so this was, you know, as a standards person, working for a few different companies, not just Microsoft, but you know, you go through a few of them and you see certain dynamics, and one thing that's always present is you're asking people who would normally seek to eat each other's lunches to sit at the table and cooperate. And that's difficult. When you look at this particular instance, it has an additional dimension of complexity because now you also have an ideological filter, like partisanship. And so when we originally started, that was one of the things that we had to really deal with. It was like, if I sit down and talk about this, like, am I, not only am I perhaps sharing information with a competitor, like, am I revealing progressive intellectual property to a Republican? But the way we
It's a real issue.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I mean,
different organizations that are participating.
yeah, I shouldn't joke. It is true, but the question is, like, once we got more concrete about it and figure out, like, okay, what are we actually talking about? And so we really needed to make it clear what it is that we're talking about, which is we're talking about a wire format. Right? We're not talking about the intellectual property or the magic that happens, let's say, about how you match to a voter file. Like, that's still up for the implementation to figure out. But we can agree that a person has a first name and a last name, or a family name and a given name, right? We can agree that, like, an address is going to be address lines and then postal code and then country code. We can agree on that. And that's often what it comes down to.
Right, so you can agree on some standards, but you also still, a lot of that intellectual property and a lot of the ability, the standards aren't something that we sort of want to, share, more broadly. It's some competitive advantage for the progressive movement. And you've got a number of organizations involved. Can you talk a little bit about how you brought together different aspects of the folks in the community? You've got, end users, you've got developers, you've got standard people, you've got voter file people, you've got online organizing tools, offline organizing tools. Can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing together all the different voices at the table?
So I would say, we have a couple different committees to help govern this and kind of give everybody the voice that and kind of ways for them to participate. And I would say, also note that these committees are open for people to join. So if this is interesting to you, we'll talk about more about that at the end. So we have our governance and executive committee, which kind of handle logistics. So Tim is VP of Education, I'm VP of Outreach. So Tim educates, and I help set up conference panels and things like that. Though Gayatri really did the lion's share of the work on this one. So we have logistical support and kind of handling that kind of stuff, and then the main work goes on in the tech committee. So people can apply to join the tech committee, and you can apply if you are representing a vendor, if you are a software developer, anybody who has interest in helping actually craft the standard. You can apply, and then the committee votes. And when you're accepted, then you get invited to our weekly Thursday calls. And then we also have a couple other committees that we use. So we have a progressive committee. So this hasn't been used that much so far, but may be used in the future, and that's kind of how we handle the partisanship piece. So if there are things that we want to discuss in the spec that we don't feel comfortable discussing in a more public way, because they have some kind of special sauce to them, we can do that in the progressive committee, and so only folks who are aligned with the progressive movement are allowed to join that. And then lastly, we have what we call our customer coalition. So these are folks who may not be interested or have the capacity to help us determine whether we should use first name or given name, for someone's name, but they think that this work is important. They want to stand up and be counted, and they're interested in seeing how this standard can work with their work. So they can join our customer committee. They can put their logo on our website, and then we convene that committee a couple of times a year to give them updates on the specification, get some of their feedback. So it's a way for people to kind of raise their hand and be counted and say, I think this is important.
I think that customer coalition has been a really crucial part of getting new vendors on board and also encouraging vendors to do the implementation, because that's just a big part of how the organizing kind of behind the scenes happen. A bunch of groups get together who use the same tool, and they say, we really want this tool to be part of the coalition. We really want to have access to all these other tools that are going to be interoperable. So I think that's been really important.
Yeah.
Also, you have a great phrase for describing this, called enlightened self-interest.
Right, it's what I like to call enlightened self-interest, where it's not just about your immediate bottom line, it's about thinking long-term about how your company is going to grow and continue to get more customers. And if you keep your customers happy, that's a good way to do it. We kind of have a venue for that to happen. I also just think using GitHub has been an interesting tool to use. I've only used GitHub for software development before, all about coding. We're actually doing the whole spec in GitHub. So if you want to add a field to a person, you have to create an issue about it. That creates a platform for discussion about what that format should be like. Sometimes those discussions get very involved. And then once someone has a solution, they actually write out what that spec should be and issue a pull request. And then everyone can review the pull request and make additional adjustments and finally get that incorporated. So it's all a very transparent, open process, which I think has been great.
Yeah. The documentation is created on GitHub, people can edit it there.
Yeah. One last thing on the customer thing. So one of the things I learned from doing corporate standards is that when a bunch of vendors get in a room on a committee and they're kind of left to themselves, like they'll pretty much like argue forever. Like the discussion will never really converge. And we're all engineers, and so my way is better than your way, and I'm happy to hold my ground until the cows come home, or until you just give in. And what helps is if you put some customers in the room, it's amazing. Like they'll behave quite differently. Yeah, something they're much more agreeable, and some difference over like an angle bracket doesn't seem as life or death anymore. So
and they're solution focused. They're probably trying to get to the end customer.
Right.
That's expanding it.
Yeah. Having the customers in the customer coalition and being paying attention helps as a forcing function to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I think that was probably one of the smartest things that you did. I think I know for me, the benefit of having the customers at the table was key because it helped to define, it helped to crystallize the need. But the added benefit was that it made us all much more accountable and much more solutions oriented, trying to get to an answer. So I thought that was really well done on your part.
Thank you.
If we were to look forward and try and read the tea leaves a little bit, we're about, I guess, 2 full years into the spec now in terms of the group and working together. If you were to think about where we're going to be in another year, so the next South in March of 2016, where do you hope OSDI will be? Where will the movement be?
Well, when we started this, we told ourselves that we wanted to be ready for the 2016 election cycle. So, and I think that we're on track. I think that in a year, I think you'll see a chunk of implementations of OSDI from core large platforms in this space. I think you'll see a bunch of, or at least a few applications that are, sort of maybe laser focused apps, little startups that are OSDI compliant that you can compose in on some of the major platforms. And I think you'll see maybe libraries in Ruby and Python for script developers to use, maybe PHP as well, to get basic data in and out of OSDI.
Yeah, I would echo that one on kind of the libraries, and I think you'll see some software start kicking up that people will be able to use to build their own things and kind of mix their own integrations. I also think you'll probably start seeing people be trained on this, right? I think that's a big part of this. There's definitely, we're talking at the level of vendors, and then we're talking about customers who kind of consume it, but there's also this kind of level of data manager, right, in a lot of these campaigns who, maybe they're not full-on software developers, but they got skills and they can write a Python script. And, I think you're going to see them starting to use this and people being trained on this standard as well, or it being used as an example when those data managers get trained.
Yeah.
Tim, I pick on the spot. You work at NOI, and a lot of NOI's mission is around training these folks, like data managers. Can you talk a little bit about, NOI and some of the work? I know that you've just departed, but some of the work that you have seen or that you hope to have continued at NOI around the spec?
Yeah, every year we run several data boot camps, which is a training program that lasts a week. It's sort of like an intensive 9 to 9 every day training boot camp for people who become data managers. And a lot of the time what we end up having to train folks on is how to clean data and work with CSV files and how to get data out of one system and into another system. So I think having, once the spec is fully realized and implemented, we won't have to focus on that as much, and we can focus more on how to use these tools together. I think that'll really increase the level that people are able to operate at when they come out of our NOI's trainings. I also think, in general, having this concept of app ecosystem will be really good going into the 2016 election, because a lot of times people out in the field have, like Josh said, or Jason said, a bunch of these, minor Python skills, whatever. They build these very niche solutions to the problems, and then those tools disappear because no one needs them again, or no one else is aware of them. But I think this spec will help kind of shine light on those things and put it out there so people can add their tools to this ecosystem, and then they'll kind of be kept in the long term. I also think I'd like to see the spec kind of go beyond just the progressive technology movement, which we've already started doing. There's other non-political vendors who are involved with the spec. But I think there's a lot of potential for it to be used by organizations that are tracking information about people that is not political related. I think we use the example of a health organization that's trying to track vaccinations of individuals. This kind of tool could actually be used for that as well. So I'm hoping to see it broaden out beyond where it's currently at.
Yeah, and I agree. What we're doing here is really dealing with the basic building blocks of organizing. And organizing happens in a lot of contexts, right? Certainly it happens in the political realm and the nonprofit realm, but it happens in the case management realm. It happens in the sales realm, right? There's a lot of, so when you're dealing with tracking people and what interactions they've had with an entity or organization, and what information is on the people, and when they updated that information, right? That stuff is at least to some degree universal. So, I think there are a lot of applications beyond the kind of political technology stuff that we are mostly doing right now that I think are really interesting, right? I would love to see a global health organization join and kind of give some input into what they might need on a standard API. I'd love to, hear about more from maybe the marketing departments of some of our current customers or, current coalition members about, how this can be used in their sales process. I think there's a lot there, because these building blocks, if you look at it through the organizing lens, are somewhat universal.
Well, I'm not I can't see the audience members. Josh, can I turn it over to you to take questions from the audience? I'm going to look to Twitter and see if there's any questions that were posted there for our panel.
Video's not on.
Oh, wait, she can't see our video? Oh, you turned it on. Okay.
I can't see you guys know.
Yeah, so we want to do it.
Do that,
do it.
So,
I mean, you can see me had this giant bump on my head from my concussion yesterday. But, you can feel the questions.
Okay, so here's what we'd like to do to sort of get the discussion with you started, is to, hang on, appreciate your flexibility here with our logistical challenges. So we want to get a sense of like who you are and what you do. So before we ask like who is a practitioner and that kind of thing. So if a few of you could kind of raise your hand and just tell us maybe I work for this kind of organization, and this is the kind of problem that I've run into, just to sort of like seed the room with a few problems that we can talk about.
And actually, if folks can go to the microphone, because this is being podcasted, so they want to make sure to get all the audio.
Yeah. So anyone willing to be our first volunteer? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Son.
Yeah. Count to 5.
Hello?
And can you also repeat the question?
Yeah, we'll repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen McCabe. I'm with the IEEE, so very familiar with standards. It's the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. For some of you in the room who may not know that, it's a large professional organization, but also we're standards developers. So you can put your wireless technology, Wi-Fi into standards. We're the group that helps that. So one of the questions I wanted to pose, which is useful to me, is we're talking about APIs and the importance of that, especially when we get into IoT. Internet of Things coming on board. How are you addressing it? Is this spec addressing the privacy and security issues?
Good question.
Privacy and security challenges.
So the question, Gayatri, was how are we addressing privacy and security around this data, which is a very good question.
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
So I think at the moment, the concrete answer is probably SSL basic auth for certain situations, OAuth for others. Right now, our current data model is things like people, addresses, events, donations. which aren't necessarily like IoT style things, at least the way I understand it. So our security situation is perhaps simpler than yours.
I would say, there's a couple ways to think about it. So one is that this API is meant to transfer data between systems. I think it's interesting to think about how that gets down to the individual, like on their phone, right? I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think there's definitely a difference in security when you're talking about servers talking to servers versus, someone's phone talking to something else. But I think we're starting to think about what that looks like. I think there's going to be, OAuth is probably going to end up being the major way for now, just kind of it's web-based, it's easy enough for people to use. Server to server, it's probably, based on API keys and, all that kind of stuff. And I would echo what Josh says, we're not dealing with credit card numbers, for example, on the API or social security numbers or things like that. So there is a different standard, I think, in the data. But it really is meant for administrators to move their data around. So we kind of rely on the systems that are being used to have decent privacy policies and decent web security. And they can use our spec to move data between them and use the security standards that the spec approves of. But in terms of by using this app, are you going to share your personal information with 100 random people? That's we kind of rely on the vendor to not do things like that.
Yeah, I think this topic will come up a lot more as we approach more and more implementations. So far we've just been talking about what the data format is essentially, but as people started actually building this out, this is going to come up a lot.
Yep.
A lot of the companies who do have fairly sensitive data, like Catalyst, where Gayatri used to work, has the entire national voter file, a huge commercial database, and all sorts of information about individuals. So it's going to be a big concern for them, for VAN, and for all these groups as well.
Well, and ultimately it's the clients, right? It's the customer organization that collects the data, and they're going to start governing the use of that data. That governs, what data can be shared. So, that's something that it's not set by the vendors. It's something that's set by the end user. So the CR Club, for example, any of those types of organizations, when you sign up, there's an opt-in, and you agree to share or not share your information. And so they're the organizations that are setting that.
Hi. My name is Gayatri Bhalla. I live and work in Washington, D.C. So at the top of this screen, I saw that the word progressive is in big, bold letters. Is there a particular reason that you're not working, since it's just an open data standard, that you're not working across the political spectrum, or even, with unaffiliated, or apolitical people? I mean, as you said, it drives down development costs for everyone, and there are, I can think, especially in the tech field, a lot of issues that don't really fall across traditional right-left divide. So I'd really like to hear about that.
Sure. So first, let me pick off the easy part. So we do actually work with... What?
Repeat the question.
So the question was basically like, what we identify as progressive, why don't we work, let's say, more broadly with like Republicans across the aisle, right? One of the things we do is we do work with people who are outside of the political space or like apolitical. So like Microsoft is a member, and there will be others like that, where like, those companies, their business is not this space, it's just perhaps one vertical they touch. So we do look beyond it. To your first part of your question about like, what about the other side of the political spectrum? I think with that, it's a completely valid question. I think when we started the organization, the question was, especially before we had really like gotten crisp about what it is we were going to do, was, well, just who's comfortable sitting at the same table with whom? And especially given what the topic is that's going to be discussed. And so in order to get the group started and to get like the first meetings to happen, the people who are interested in doing it also felt that, at least for now, we want to just constrain like who's at the table in terms of the political spectrum, because we're not exactly sure, right? Like how much intellectual property is actually in these discussions. And so so that's kind of where we ended up.
And I would say, a couple other pieces. So one, we definitely want to bring in people who kind of don't do politics, right? So Microsoft is, at the table. We'd love to bring in your Eventbrites and your Salesforces and, whatever. They don't identify in a partisan way. Most of their business has nothing to do with politics. But they do deal with these core components, and they can have a seat at the table. And I think that goes for folks in government, right, who obviously identify as nonpartisan, goes for nonprofits, C3 type stuff, who identify the same way. And I would say the other thing is that while the discussions and the building and the committees of the spec are progressive, it is in fact an open standard. So there is nothing stopping anybody from using what has been done. And I think while we retain some kind of trademark on our name, that's about it, right? So, I think it was important, as Josh said, that when you're sitting people down at the table, that people are comfortable. I think it was important that at the level of kind of control of the spec, especially because this is being used for political work, and the people who do it for political work, like me, we want to win and beat the other guy. It was important that be held. But it is an open standard, and we do invite people especially who identify as nonpartisan and don't necessarily work on politics to join, because I think there are some universal concepts.
Yeah, it's partly historical because this effort actually came originally out of a panel at a conference called Roots Camp, which is what the New Organizing Institute runs, and it's an unconference that happens every year with mostly progressive individuals. And there's a bunch of progressive technology vendors that got together. Josh ran that panel, and the idea that came out of it was this. But since the beginning, there's always been a progressive committee versus the general technology committee. And the idea there was that the technology committee would be open to anyone who's, like we said, nonpartisan or progressive, while the progressive committee would be set aside for those who want to discuss more proprietary issues. So,
Next question.
Hi there, my name is Lauren Burton. I'm with the Case Foundation. And as a developer myself, I'm really excited about the opportunity for open data, open standards. But there's really a huge opportunity here to expand this reach. I just wanted to see if you had any plans or roadmap to engage open data, city data, expand broader than progressive campaigns, because it has a huge opportunity to really unleash entrepreneurship within local communities.
Well, I don't think we see ourselves as restricted to progressive campaigns. It's really like the nonprofit and campaign space that kind of go together. We do actually, we are interested in some of those things. In fact, some of there's just resources, we just haven't been able to recruit in those spaces. And it depends on what kind of open data it is. We do sort of keep an eye on the Google Civic API, sorry. And some others, but it's this question of you have to have the problem to be small enough that it's tractable and that we can do it. If you try and boil the ocean, right? But if we had, let's say, a large influential organization in that space to come and join OSDI and say, hey, I think we should also include these problems, and we're bringing in resources to help do it, I think you'd hear applause.
And part of the reason that we're here at South by is actually, in fact, to broaden awareness about it and to get more folks involved.
Yeah, and I think that, especially at kind of the city and local level, right, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with, interactions, and I think that's well within the specification that we're building, and I think it's a really interesting use case. So we would invite folks to join and kind of, or at least just have a discussion, right? Spend some time, sit down with the specification we've made already, and see what the analogs are between the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing.
So I'm a developer that works with a lot of nonprofits using Drupal, Sierra, WordPress. As far as I know, there's no open source license for code that restricts the use to just progressive organizations. You don't have licenses on any of your code that you're currently reading. So as a developer, how can I even know what I'm allowed to do with the code that you're posting up to GitHub?
Well, first, this is a quick, so we don't ship code, it's the specification.
You have code in your GitHub repos, so you have WordPress examples, you have...
Yeah, I think we have a couple examples that are up there, right, and I believe those are licensed like MIT or something, and if they're not, they should be.
Yeah, we know that, yeah, we're actually deciding what that is, but in terms of the use of, the examples, they're sort of an ancillary thing, they're not, we don't consider ourselves a software producing organization. We're more of a standard setting body, so we produce a document, which lays out here are the field names. But we are going to attach a license to it, but the license is not going to restrict it for use to just any political thing. I mean, anyone can use it. That's why we have it on GitHub. The difference is who has control over the spec in terms of evolving it, and that's the committee that does that.
And it might come in that, it depends what tools you want to integrate with, and each individual vendor essentially is sort of the gatekeeper of who they want to work with. So you can write to the spec, and if the tool that you're offering isn't just a progressive tool, then you might not be able to work with the vendors who are just progressive organizations. But we're trying to get more in there who are not just progressive organizations, and over time you can work with any of those other ones. So it's sort of up to each individual vendor who they want to work with.
Right. I think it's the main product of our work is this specification, which isn't really a piece of software, so doesn't need or have a license. We do have some examples, and we probably will have more in the future, and we need to be better about what the licenses are and those things.
Yeah.
But we don't consider that the main body of work. That's not where the time is spent mostly.
Hi, my name is Gregory Foster with Consumer Reports, and we're working on a platform that helps organizations actually gather stories from their supporters. So it's really nice to actually find out about the spec y'all have been working on. It's a good fit. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about how far along you are in terms of defining the specification, and as well, what's your plan for versioning it? So in terms of knowing when to jump in.
The time to jump in is always now. I think we're probably, to use IETF terminology, we're approaching last call on V1. There are a few, as it always is, right? The spec looks pretty stable, and then when you call and say, okay, we're going to close this down, then of course issues crop up. So we're at that point now. There are a couple that are being debated. But yeah, I would expect within, by the summer, the V1 will be done. We will continue to evolve. I think it's looking like the versioning strategy will be kind of a composability strategy, extensibility strategy, where there'll be the base specification, which probably won't change that much, and then new resource models will come in and be added, right? We may not have, let's say, an advertising resource model right now, but that'll be added and composable, so the whole spec doesn't have to change. And we will have a minor version strategy where non-breaking changes can be changed. Breaking changes require a new version, and I think just in general, in my experience, you just kind of discourage those. You do more if you have to. You do a workaround. It's a little less, it's a little weird, but it's better if you can keep compatibility.
Yeah, I think we're very rapidly approaching stability, and then you're going to see minor non-breaking versions that mostly add things that wouldn't break, existing implementations. So now, I would say now is the tail end of a good time if you really want to, jump in and add something new, because that window is closing, at least for version 1. But in terms of extensibility later on, if you like the core concepts and you have some ideas about how to add things on, then I think that's what our future looks like.
Yeah. We do have a mechanism where individual vendors can create their own kind of extensions to the spec as well. Even if it's not part of the core spec, they can use it as sort of a prototype that might eventually get incorporated into the core spec if it is generally applicable.
Yeah,
so there's flexibility around that.
You imagine as it gets bigger, it starts looking like, CSS web standards. It starts with a browser prefix and then it ends up in the spec, that kind of thing. I would imagine that as things get bigger, as more people join, as the ship gets harder to move quickly, that's a strategy that gets employed. But it's a good question.
Yeah, I think just in terms of what's defined now, what we have: person, event, donation. What else do we have?
Right. We have people. We
Right.
have petitions and signatures. So
Right.
petitions are the thing that people sign. Signatures are the thing that people make. We have similarly forms and submissions, events and attendances, fundraising pages and donations. We have tags, custom fields on people, just kind of key value hashes that you might want to store. We very soon, hopefully, will have canvassing and advocacy. Those are two that are being kind of debated right now. And then we have various helper modules to help you get the data in and out. So that's kind of the space that we're looking at right now. And honestly, I think the main one of interest is the people spec. Some of those other ones your app may not apply, right? But just being able to share people information and maybe things like tag information in a in a compatible way is extremely important.
And in terms of the format of the spec, just to get briefly, it's a JSON with HAL. So JSON is very standard. HAL is an extension that allows you to kind of add links to objects, which makes it very easy to hit the endpoint of the API and quickly see what aspects of the spec have been implemented by that particular vendor. And then you can follow links through it to find documentation and relate objects to each other. So it's pretty useful in that way.
Yeah, that's right.
We had a question from Twitter, so if you know when I can raise my.
Yeah, go.
Go ahead.
Question from Twitter was, are there any government agencies interested in participating in the OSDI coalition? Josh, do you want to take that one?
Well, the NSA is obviously already there, so I don't know. Have we gotten any?
Not yet. I mean, I just started working in government recently, although there's been no progress on that yet. I think there's a lot of extra hurdles to jump through for government to be involved, but I can definitely see down the road at least them being consumers of some of the tools and make use of the spec. And open APIs are all the rage in federal government right now, and the city governments as well. So I anticipate there might be some overlap down the road, certainly.
And I would imagine that the federal government might be the last to jump on something like this.
Yeah.
A, because of the way the bureaucracy works, but B, because of, they less deal at the level of individual people, right? A couple folks here brought up local government. Like, I think that's we're much more likely to see that sooner rather than later. And that's, I think, much more exciting, right? Because they do deal at the level of individual people. That said, I think there's also some really interesting things in kind of the open government advocacy space, right? I'd like to see elected officials kind of think about how this can be used for constituent management and things like that. That's something that I thought about and talked with a couple of folks for, and I would imagine might happen.
Any other questions from the audience?
Any other horror stories you want to share about your data just not getting where it needs to be? Because we've all had those.
Or anyone interested in learning more, come up and see panel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Helping to contribute, helping to define, helping to.
Yeah, well, so let's finish up with that. Just kind of how you get involved, if this is interesting for you. You want to talk about that?
So just real quick. So who works for like either a nonprofit or a cause-oriented organization? Okay, so like we talked about earlier. So just to recap the ways to get involved, right? The simplest is just go to the GitHub repository. You can look and provide feedback. The next level up is if you want to join our customer coalition, which basically gets to be one of those customers that are keeping an eye on things and the vendors know you're there. You can show up to the committee if you like and listen in or talk about it. If you want to go a level higher, there's what we call like our developer member, which is you're basically a member of the committee. It's a voting member. And you're also expected to participate on a regular basis and pick up action items from time to time.
So I think it all starts at opensporter.org. That's our website. From there, it'll lead you to the specification on GitHub, so you can read through it. You might find some mistakes. You could submit an issue or a pull request to help us fix that stuff. We love that kind of participation if that's the way you're interested in participating. And then, the other very easy one is just join the customer coalition. So you can, there's contact information on the website. Let us know that you're interested. And I think we just need your logo and a little bit about your organization, and we have a quick vote on that. And then we put your logo on the website and you're part of the customer coalition. Very, very easy.
I think anyone would be a really big help to review the documentation, because we're all pretty in the weeds of this, and a lot of us are engineers as well. So we're doing the best we can to make it broadly applicable to a wide audience. But any help you can give us on that would be very appreciated.
And then if you want to dig in and be in our weekly calls, it's just an hour a week, but show up and help us write the spec and vote on all the changes and that kind of stuff. Then you're welcome to join, as Josh said, the tech developer committee. And so again, just we need a little bit about yourself and your organization, and there's a voting process in that, and then you'll be invited to the call. So that's those are the ways to get involved, and we encourage all of you to at least check it out. Maybe something that you're interested in, maybe not, and that's fine. But the more the better. There is some kind of critical mass here that we're looking for sure.
Anything else, Gayatri?
No, I would just end with the the statement that what this group has done is taken what is really a Tower of Babel and kind of aligned it, or helped to provide some guidelines in a way of aligning it to a common standard. And where this was when it started with you, Josh, in 2012, was it's really come a long way. And I don't know if folks realize how much co-opetition is involved. The folks involved compete with one another for business, they compete with one another for members and for donors, and this is really remarkable in that it is it's really come together and actually coalesced into something that is going to be used more broadly. And examples like this are rare, far too rare, and it's difficult to do. And it was only happened because of the efforts and input that all of the membership has put in. So just like Jason and Tim and Josh talking about in terms of getting involved, we're very much looking for more folks to do so. But to really kind of help to continue to move this along, because it's, and we are hoping to see it really implemented in 2016, much more broadly.
And then I think the last thing we'd say is that please rate our panel, because we like ratings. I think it's on the app or something like that.
I think it's get pressed out.
All right, well, thanks, folks, and we'll stick around here a little bit if you want to talk with any of us. We'll even keep Gayatri up on the screen, so you can ask questions to anybody.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Cool.
This is an amazing session. I would love to talk to you. First off, I used to work many moons ago, back in the day at HRC.
Oh, no way.
And did a lot of work around HRC.
Oh, HRC.
So we did a lot of work with NOI and before I created courses in life.
Absolutely.
So I think it was good.
The audio works.
Yeah, wow, good. You're pretty good. I'm going to move these.
Yeah, why don't we like split up?
Oh yeah, I'll talk to you.
So what do you guys do?
So I use their technology. So we are
Right.
unlikely partnerships that you're
Yes. Yeah, I haven't worked
See y'all ready? Because they were going to go back and forth, do her on one, and then the videos on the other, and then they were able to do the picture-in-picture.
And that's their dongle, right?
That's their dongle, yes.
developer training, so I ran into
Yeah.
where it's still. Okay, right. Yeah, no. Again, like, the video itself is about the specs, so the way that it's jumps back and forth. Individual vendors is the ones who find. All right, hold the data. Yeah, so let's place an email. Make sure there is a way to find out where it's being called, how to get some of this stuff. And each vendor, the user,
that would be great.
might have like all sorts of data. They kind of choose what data they want to see. So the user gets to decide what data it is. The vendor decides how.
But I mean, I definitely see, like,
So it is partly they are clear to them how the data is being transferred. But a lot of them have already kind of is there personal situation out there? Like the already aware of that. We're trying to make it easier for that data to see around. So like, part of that might have some way of identifying what the user can be used in a way that is. But other than that, it's mostly in keeping with their own. So collectors are on one part, open standards are another part, and clients are the other. And spec because they have a lot of influence over that. Yeah, so they work in your policies. Okay.
Great to meet you.
Another area.
I'm a technician. No, not at all. More just that, go ahead. To making sure that they do risk matrix that they're at least like reach out to state and local government distributed officers. But they need to know about what's going on.
From my perspective, a lot of notify stuff. Proactive with those who then work with safety and also might be a criminal giving the damage as well.
I'll be going there. They're having a they're later on today at 3:30 a poll on government data innovation. But the Commerce Secretary and the Secretary is going to be there, and their new chief again, with the amount of on data within government, there's people like they should be so that they can speak it from that like policy part to the implementation part.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not just the collector, the vendor, Sure. Most of our models are vendors. Yeah.
So this city has to.
Yeah, so like we're the manager.
It's city education
So that really depends on different states. The vendor side, the data gets to be
But so the challenge is that
campaign side is up
the projects need prepare people within
so it's sort of a collaborative effort. And at the New York Institute where they're a training organization. So a lot of so a lot of security is a big part of that. People what's
So actually, it's funny. I mean, I guess they have a problem. I saw there's a thread on one of the
for sure.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, I read it. I saw the there's that. There's also concern about getting through it. It's political fear of like overlord,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So you haven't tackled it. So your idea to bring yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They haven't actually bothered to do the research, and they're like, oh my god, like this or that. I mean, they're serious. They won't have a conversation. We'll do that.
It's a competitive thing. Like some people are serious and like really care about these engineering aspects, but the community as a whole has these very vocal, open advocates.
Right. And like we're not going to try and go through and hire people or city community.
We have like
Pillars for that community. Really have some messages having the discussion.
Right.
I think it's probably makes and there's also
So I
Definitely saw like, I don't know, I really range like as far as
like CD, and like I think we'll probably some of those who will get involved or maybe implement a module for
Right, so you would accept that individual vendors representing these solutions to be part of this, even though the larger projects probably would never be able to agree on anything and join or
Well, I mean, look, it's not like they are like they're multi-pets. Like Jason runs an action network. They make and like if anyone wants to get, you don't need to be in charge of part of the city and you have some other thing else to bring to the table. Yeah, cracking the city doing it, they'll do it, they can get lack of modules or custom G's or
Correct, but in order to implement these things to adhere to a standard, you have to have some body, nobody controls the whole thing, so you have to get some agreement that we need to structure things this way so that it can work with the standard. So it's easier for things like payment processing to get things and tax requirements. It's easier to get that stuff because that's either a legal requirement or a technical requirement that already exists and something that everyone's interested in.
Yeah, if you want to start working on your own equipment, we'll get everything figured out.
Because if there is a competing spec from another company where you might,
that may be the way things play out.
yeah. So I've seen this in
name is guy
community
called
media. There was
1203. Okay, you're my witness out here. Thank you for talking.
scale to get all vendors in, and that ultimately imploded when they realized that it was also easier for organizations to switch from one vendor to another. Yeah. So
cards yet, so those 5 forms.
But that was unless there's many more people. Every like half hour, they're going to send a lot of
I'm getting good review. Yeah. I wish there were licenses that how code gets
So wait, so what's stories and what's the consumer reports?
Yeah, because we are, because we're not talking about
So is this a consumer reports project? Okay.
I see my code running on PBS or yard space, and it's essentially a co-op contact page, but none of that content gets out. For some reason, it's okay for me to try to make the details right.
Ideally, right?
You yeah, exactly. That's what I was
No, I think taking down the wall of learners are talking essentially because artisanship is not a protected class in law. So like you can write a so you can write a license that restricts use based on
home repairing graphic.
legal
It's awesome. Okay, it looks like you just that's totally cool.
one of those things.
Yeah, thanks for the good. I wanted to know actually about the voting platform you talked about.
So the only way to protect what you're doing is to keep the source closed. This is only available.
So
you're allowed to do
challenge that actually use some of those concepts. So it would be new, but I kind of want to understand how that works. And then are those types of things ever going to be part of what you guys are doing?
Well, so the app itself, basically, we got early voting in my mind.
That's a good question on that. So is this probably like one of the engaged items, like the voter questions?
That's
That'll be bad.
Okay, Mark was one voted on that.
It's good to have
I mean, had,
Yeah, it was.
Facebook
It was.
would basically
And
down here.
that stuff works.
Yeah, it works.
Surprisingly well.
We tied to a voter.
Ryan's picture thing.
The biggest problem though is that the new Facebook API changes. Break.
Okay.
So like, not clear what the future is.
That's always the problem with these things. Like, you find wonderful APIs and you pull them together, and then they evolve in ways that just they don't care about you. And they just move
So they
on.
just decide, you know,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. So there's conversations that are going around about how to do something like that. How do we allow the civic engagement aspect? Telling you to vote, separate that from like
Josh comes from the standards world.
a political campaign, like Hillary sucks down all your friends' data, and users are pissed off.
That's when the security question gets really hard.
Actually, I go on aggressive on my schedule.
And that may or may not.
Feel free to
We'll get out of here. Sorry.
Did they want this? I'm going to ask them. Hey, we got our next presenter coming to us. Hey, would y'all like Dr. Clark?
All
right. Because all we're going to do is recycle them. That's all 4 of them.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, I'll get out of your way here.
It's fine. We just heard they're on their way. Just, in case I have another Skype or some snafu that I have to run and get a Freeman guy for.
Yeah, right. I think, well,
That was good. That was a great, y'all worked really well and did that. I totally was not thinking about this box because, like I said, I've been doing the EDU and everybody has one zip, one lap. That's
All
it.
right, I'm going to meet a friend of mine for lunch. And I'll catch up with y'all. Yeah, they have our text. Yeah.
what's later today?
Nothing particular. I'm meeting a friend for lunch.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It really surprisingly worked perfectly.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, it worked out well.
Well, you know, it's the interactive.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta do it right.
Yeah.
Got a reputation to maintain. Yeah.
Yes, yes. We want that. Where are y'all from?
DC.
DC.
Although Josh is up in New York.
Okay. Yeah, we want
He's
to
down in DC a lot.
We want to be here to go home.
Yeah, no,
People
absolutely.
really worked and helped us out.
It was
so
great.
Yeah.
You know, I came in 2009 as well.
Okay.
But Interactive isn't quite as big then. I think it's gotten bigger.
It just gets bigger and bigger every year. The EDU portion,
Yeah.
that gets bigger. That was kind of a small thing.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that actually.
Yeah, that's a
awesome.
lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like hanging out with all the teachers.
It was last week, essentially.
That was Monday through Thursday
Yeah.
with the EDU.
Seems they're trying to cover everything now. There's like a whole fashion track now, like sports.
Yes, and of course we're just kind of branching out.
Taking over everything,
Covering
yeah.
everything, and
Yeah.
you know, my thing is I'm waiting on the movies. I like to go see all the movies.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to that. Last time I had an interactive badge, but not a gold badge.
Right.
So
So
this
good,
time
so
I'll
you'll
get to check it out.
lots of good movies. And music.
I'm going to keep mine. You want yours?
Yeah, might as well, right?
Yeah.
Memento. Kind of large, but.
I know.
I know
But
that
yeah,
he-
that's cool.
Cool. All right, guys, have fun.
Yeah, thank you for all your help.
Is that ours?
That's mine, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's
Yeah.
not mine. Make sure